I love some of the work that's been done in the UK, particularly around professional identity, because it turns out that actually, the reasons and hangups that we have about leaving practice or changing what we do is a lot of it is formed by, what we believe is a real vet, how we form our professional identity about who we are and how we make sense of who we are in the world. There's like 8 million different ways to be a cool veterinarian.
Welcome to Vet Life Reimagined, and I have the perfect guest to talk about our mission of possibilities in veterinary medicine and how to find where you thrive. Dr. Melanie Barham started her veterinary career as an equine veterinarian, including performance horses in Canada. She later helped start a surveillance program called the Ontario Animal Health Network. She has led many projects, including currently as acting chief Executive Officer of Community Veterinary Outreach, and she's the CEO of Vets Stay Go Diversify, which is a community-based organization helping veterinary professionals build satisfying careers. One of the things Dr. Melanie describes herself as, since childhood, is bringing order to chaos. Dr. Melanie has a fascinating career journey, and we all started somewhere, and she had actually debated veterinary medicine over another career path. So let's get to the conversation. When did you know you wanted to get into veterinary medicine?
That's a good question. I think so I didn't decide when I was a really little person, like a lot of people do. I decided actually when I was a senior in high school, I did always have an interest in vet med, and I volunteered at a vet clinic, and I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I also really wanted to be a writer, and I really wanted that to be my career. So I was very torn, and right up until the last day for deciding where I was going to go to a science program or a creative writing program, I couldn't decide. But in the end, what did it for me was that I had spent some time with a large animal practice, and I decided that I loved it so much. And I was in a creative writing course with high school at the same time. And I was like, well, embarrassingly spent the entire time talking, like writing about animals and about like how beautiful calves' eyelashes are and like all of these kind of things. So I think I just decided that it was probably the best place for me and then I could write as well. So yes, so that's my story.
Nice. Going into veterinary school, did you think you would do large animal, or what did you think?
Good question. I thought that I might because I came from a farming background. Parents are not farmers, but I lived in a farming community. I milked at a dairy farm for part of my high school career, and I worked at a large animal clinic. So I did think, yeah. And I had always had horses, so that seemed like a natural fit. But yeah, I really didn't know, actually. I kind of kept my options open. And then it wasn't until I kind of went into second, third, and fourth year that I had the opportunity to specialize more in horse stuff.
So how was vet school for you?
I think vet school was amazing. There were so many great people there. And I found that it's obviously a really intense time, but it was a time that I got involved in lots of clubs and had lots of wonderful opportunities to try out different things and I guess the social aspect is really so fun. And like, it was just great to be in that community and to have everything be kind of your oyster and just opportunities to try different things, I think.
It's a fantastic perspective, and this is why I love asking people how they experience vet school, because not everybody is that open to having the social activities and things. Because speaking for myself, I was a studyaholic. I sat in my little house and studied for 4 years, and I did not enjoy it. And there's a lot of things I would, if I were going to recommend to vet students today, to do something differently than I did. So do you have a big tip that you give vet students on when it comes to like the best thing you can do being a veterinary student?
Well, I don't know that I don't know that I'm always the best person to like I had a good time at vet school, but I did study hard. And I too, Megan, remember being like in my little house studying and being like very overwhelmed and having lots of stuff going on and being like kind of sometimes feeling like I was on the brink of like complete overwhelm. For sure. And I think that that's probably a common experience. So I don't want to say that it was like just this amazing time, like everyone, I think maybe I was skipping over some of the hardships that are also present in vet school, because it's a very intense time. But when I look back on it, I think of that as just a wonderful time that, we were going through a common and shared experience together with a group of people who they're going to go out into the world and go do all kinds of amazing things. And I look back and I see my classmates and I get together with them in different areas, and so many of them have changed in so many ways. Like I do feel like veterinary school is like a big fishbowl. And so one thing that I would say is that when you have people in your class who you're going to clash with, which is totally normal, remember that they're going to change and evolve. And this is just a very small time in their lives. And it's actually kind of amazing to see the context that you created. And maybe you didn't get along with somebody during school, but it's pretty amazing to see how they might change and evolve as they get older, and how they go out into the world too, and how they learn and evolve too. Like I'm sure I wasn't everyone's favorite person either. So it's kind of nice I don't know, I just find that an amazing transformation and kind of cool thing to see. So I do think I would encourage people to remember that this is a short time in your life, and that it feels overwhelming and hard at times, but it also can be a joyous thing, and it can be a wonderful time to try out different things and to be sociable and be among people who are kind of doing something cool together.
I liked the term you used as shared experience. You are together in the hard times, you're together in the good times. And also when someone asks, like, what do you remember about vet school? Your response was people. So it's the people that you're going to remember. It's not a particular test. It's the people and the relationships you build. So I think that's really important.
It's galvanizing, isn't it? It's galvanizing to go through something. It's kind of like having siblings. It's like having like 110 siblings who, you see them and you're like, oh, there's the person who always has their hand up. There's the person who always has who's eating their yogurt in a particular way. Like it's just like a sibling. Like it's like, oh, this is my brother always does these things this way. But they've gone through that same, I would say with siblings, like it's kind of nice because they know they know your brand of crazy. They know because they went through the same experience, right? Like they know you in a way that other people don't.
I love that too. And I think this is all part of what we're going to be talking about when it comes to shaping your career, having a say in what your journey is going to be like, and discovering that piece of you, you're crazy, and how that can live out in this really interesting profession of the fishbowl of people. So you were able to do some work with the large animals and some equine work. By the time you were at the end of vet school, where were you? And did that change from your initial thoughts coming in?
Yeah, so I decided to do an equine internship kind of last minute, like later in the year. So some people I know had their plans made like first year of vet school.
Yeah.
I did not have that made. So I decided later to do an internship. Ended up traveling all over the United States later in the summer and into the first semester of final year, trying to find a good fit for an internship. And I found a fabulous internship in Southern California that was absolutely the best place for me, for sure. Best mentors. And so I interned there and then worked in equine practice. I came back to Canada and I worked in Ottawa and also in which is our capital, and then also worked near Guelph for several years as a performance horse vet. Then I went after I had my daughter, I was looking around trying to figure out sustainability in my career. And I decided to move to a position at the University of Guelph where they had an amazing surveillance program that they wanted to launch. So so I was there to support that launch and take that project from a project to a program called the Ontario Animal Health Network, which is still going today. And it's still a wonderful and exciting program. That's a really good example of a collaborative partnership between government and academia and laboratory and private practice, which is cool. And during that time, I got an MBA, I got a project management designation, had a second child, and I had loads of opportunities to work at the university and do lots of different and amazing things like teach a course or speak to students or speak at conferences or, just be involved in an incredible amount of different projects. After a while, I decided to move into a position in not-for-profit and managing a national not-for-profit called Animal Health Canada. And kind of in between that time, I had started around 2017, I had started a blog and Facebook community about veterinary careers and all the different ways that we can be satisfied and telling people stories about who they were in vet med, kind of like your podcast. And that's probably why I love listening to all the episodes of your podcast. And so it had grown, and we had done some during the pandemic and afterwards. I had done some collaborative projects to do some big conferences to talk about. We did the Global Veterinary Career Summit with two others, and then a student conference as well called the Big Student Careers Fair, which were big virtual conferences, and brought like 1,300 veterinarians and 1,300 veterinary students together to talk about career development. And then, so it had grown into a business. And then when I got really busy at my job with Animal Health Canada, I ended up looking around and trying to find a collaborator. And so I ended up merging together with Vets Stay Go Diversify, which had been around also since 2017. And the other business partner, Ebony Escalona, had been she and I had worked together significantly, even though we live on other sides of the world. So we merged together and I ended up coming over as their CEO. So that's been kind of an amazing experience. And then during that time of transition, I was also asked to be the CEO of Community Veterinary Outreach, which is a national charity in Canada that help people and pets that are experiencing homelessness with veterinary and human health care. So it's just been it's been a kind of a cool, wild ride, but it's a very squiggly career path, but that's where I am.
I understand the squiggly. I want to go back to something early you said, and it was around when you had your daughter, and you said the term sustainability when it comes to career. And I like that term a lot better than work-life balance, which is, I think, what a lot of us use. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean when you say like a sustainable career, what you personally were looking for at that point?
Yeah. And this is the same thing that I wrote in my essay to get into my MBA too, which is that, so I did an MBA in sustainable commerce. And I know that when people think of sustainability, they often think of the environmental aspect, and that, certainly that's part of that degree. But for me, it's also about the sustainability for people. So is what you're doing able to satisfy you personally? Does it work with all the rest of the parts of your life? Are you able to survive that marathon, and not just survive, but maybe thrive throughout that? Because there's, I think there are, as you say, that work-life balance, it kind of assumes that everything is always going to be 50-50 or like 90-100, 90-10. And I don't think that's always the case. I know people use the term work-life integration instead. I tend to think of it more as sustainability, because I do think of careers as it's really a marathon. Like what's sustainable as our parameters in our lives change. Like when I first graduated, I didn't have kids, I had a dog, and I had responsibilities about paying my bills, but very little other responsibilities. My focus was certainly on building my professional abilities and some hobbies and things like that. But it was very different than when you have a child or two children, or if you have to take care of somebody else in your life, or, if you have other responsibilities. So I think about that as our parameters change, what sustainability looks like might differ.
When we say sustainability, when it comes to our careers, it doesn't necessarily mean where can I go and that is where I'm going to be forever and ever and ever, right? It's understanding the work that is meeting your values at a particular time. Is that, and it's adjustable or flexible?
So I think our values are something that we know deep down, and that they're part of our lives. Like when I think of my values, I think they've been consistent throughout my career and probably my life. When I think about sustainability, I think about how do I find something that's going to work and fulfill the requirements that I have, like paying my bills or being happy. But also that might change throughout your career. Like you might get interested in different things, I could never have imagined that that's what I didn't even know that any of the career paths that I went down were even options when I graduated. So I think it's more about finding something that works for you at that time. And yes, those things might change over time. We know that. And they're even within practice, we know that people change what their roles are. They might become a practice manager. They might become an owner. They might become a specialist in rehab. They might decide to do, they might do lots of different things within their role. So it's really figuring out what those parameters look like and how to make it work so that you can thrive throughout that marathon of career. We've got a long career because we live for a long time now.
And we tend to be people who are very passionate about our work. And so, yeah, it's going to be a big part of what we do probably for a really long time. So you started to talk about your personal values, and you've done a lot of different things along the way. So what are your values? What's kind of your North Star that helps guide you when you come upon a potential transition in your career?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Megan, you asked us good questions. Okay. Now I'm going to have to go really deep here. So no, I know what my values are around. And actually, I'll tell you a story about values, because I think that, so my family growing up was a foster family, and we had foster children in our house for probably 25 years from the time I was 10 up until after I left for university. So I think about that because and this is where it relates to values. And very early on, my family values were really that you have a responsibility to help people who don't have as much as you. You have a responsibility to help others if you can. And kind of this other value about like problem solving. And, if you can do something, then you should. And figuring out complex problems and understanding that they're not always easily solved. So I guess from a young age, I kind of was okay with like a level of chaos and a level of kind of bringing order to that. And that was always kind of part of our job as a foster family, is like kind of bringing order to and stability and like finding solutions to things, and always being advocate for somebody else, for people who didn't have a voice, I guess. So those were like really, really firmly instilled in me as a very young person. So it makes sense that I kind of went into veterinary medicine, right? It's a profession where we advocate for others. It's a profession where we take a lot of diverse viewpoints and we bring it together to create a solution for that animal, for their welfare, those kind of things. And that's part of why I loved lameness work in horses, because it was never boring. There's 8,000 ways to find the right solution. You're dealing with a lot of different opinions, and you're trying to use all the tools in your toolbox to make the horse better and also keep everybody else happy at the same time. And so that's why I love lameness work. Lots of people would love it for different reasons, but for me, it was like the complex problem solving and being the advocate for the horse. And then in my other roles, that was kind of what I did too. It was really around bringing order to kind of this chaos and bringing different ideas, divergent ideas together, and trying to find common ground and trying to bring people together. And then, recently getting involved with community vet outreach. That's an area where I never had thought about how I could explicitly bring that value of working with vulnerable sector people into veterinary work. I just had never really, as a horse vet, that wasn't something that, and a surveillance vet, and like in not-for-profit management, that wasn't something that I had really thought about. But then when I had that opportunity, I was like, oh, just this feels deeply right to join this. And like the same with Vets Day Go Diversify, it just felt deeply right to join that organization, because it really fulfilled this idea of like helping people, giving a voice to them and advocating for them and giving them tools to bring that stuff together, as well as I think I do actually naturally gravitate to kind of situations of chaos try to bring them together. So I think those are some of the things, but I hope that kind of explains maybe values and how that might play out.
It does, yes. And the organization that you're talking about is supporting, I think the term is houseless individuals and their pets as the nonprofit. So it does, maybe at first glance, it's like an equine vet goes into that, maybe not the
Sense, yeah.
easiest translation, but yeah, once you have been able to put, especially words, that sometimes that's the hardest part, putting words to our values. You are able to identify when something comes up and it does seem to meet your values. And yeah, I think you said, feels deeply right.
Yeah. And I guess that, yeah. And I would encourage, I guess if people are listening and they're not sure where they might go next, like try to listen to yourself, because I think that's also in career transition. That's something that I've never been led wrong by, is like, I collect a lot of data and I listen to a lot of people about what I should do. And like I ask my mentors, talk to a lot of people, but then I have to get really still and listen to what I want to, like really listen to whether or not it feels right. If you're listening, you probably know this feeling. You might just not listen to it very much, but you know it from like deciding to go to veterinary school. You know it from deciding to do hard things, or, finding your partner, or, whatever it is, like, when those feelings come up, just have to get still and listen to them.
Yeah. Going back to wanting to go to vet school, because it is a very competitive field, or at least I did, I experienced a lot of people who suggested coming up with backup plans and, trying to say, are you sure? There's that opportunity of listening to what you want, at least in the moment, and going with that. Always good. I'm a feedback individual. I love hearing and collecting, like you, collecting data of all the options and thoughts around it. But ultimately, it's going to be our decision. Is our career. We have to live it. So we get to decide. And high level, when you were giving the overview, it sounds like these were opportunities that came up. You weren't necessarily actively looking for them, but they arose and it felt right. So you went there. Was there ever a time when you didn't feel right in a job and knew that it was time to move on? Or was it more of an opportunity was presented and it sounded like it fit and you were ready to change. How were some of those transitions?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yes, I've certainly, so one, I think, I'll be super honest. Like, I think whenever people tell their career story, they always say like, and then this just happened.
Yeah.
And those things don't always just happen. Like, it's not, I certainly, have I applied to jobs and not got them? Have I applied to jobs I really wanted and not got them? Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Hands up for sure. And like been really upset and thought so it's not, don't skip through and think like, oh, well, I guess like Melanie never had it. Melanie never got turned down for something or never didn't get something that she wanted, because that's not true. Like, everybody has those things and everybody has times when they've been turned down. But I will also say that on reflection, like anything I've ever been turned down for, it has, I think it wasn't the right opportunity, And so, I don't necessarily believe in like fate or what have you, but I do think that saying like, what is for you, not pass you. I do believe really strongly in taking opportunities and having conversations and seeing what might be available. And I do believe in asking, kind of getting clear on what you want and thinking what kind of things you do want. Because it's amazing to me when you are very clear on what you need and want, that when you put that out there, often those opportunities will come to you. And that sounds so ridiculous, I know, but it does seem to happen. So for example, when I was transitioning to Vet Stay Go Diversify, I knew that I had like one extra day a week that I didn't necessarily have to fill, but that I was thinking about what to do with that. Should I go back to practice for a day? Because I still enjoy practice, all those kind of things. And I had some great conversations with a colleague, Dr. Michelle Lem. And I knew that they were looking for somebody, but they were asking, Michelle and I were chatting about finding somebody and some of the things that they wanted. And it didn't initially occur to me that it was something that I could even do, because I don't practice clinical medicine in small animals. It just so happened that we were sitting down and I was chatting with her and I said to her, I do have a day a week and I don't know if you hear of any opportunities, but let me know. And then they offered that job to me. So it was really about, I didn't necessarily think about that particular opportunity, but it was kind of knowing what I was interested in. And she knew me well enough a little bit to see that I might have been a good fit or what my skill sets might have been.
I definitely think speaking out some thoughts, I mean, be mindful. It isn't necessarily you need to go around saying, I hate my job. I'm looking for one. Like, that's not a good attitude.
No, that's not a good idea.
But to vocalize your interest and if you do have time or something like that, I think it is really good to share that. And you start to create advocates without even knowing, right? Because at least now you've got all these little people who are going to have antennas for when something comes up and they might think about you. And I know that's always been helpful. So what have you done on, creating support systems, mentorship, networking, those kinds of things? Have you worked on that? Do you have any thoughts around that and how that can be valuable?
Oh, yeah. So I guess I call it, like, some people call it like your personal board of directors. I kind of call them like, I call it my circle of support because I kind of see it that way more. But I have always had like a group of people who I would call upon for support, their colleagues and friends and mentors. And so I would catch up with them regularly. But there are also people who I would call upon for different types of advice. I remember when I was a new mom, I called upon 2 or 3 people who I knew were also new moms and who had, in my mind, like obviously out there just killing it and doing a great job, because they were friends and I could call upon them in that mentorship way. So I usually kind of think about it as like this big circle that's around you that you can call upon for different reasons. Sometimes it can be a looser network too. Like, it can just be people that you're networking with. And I would encourage anybody to think about networking. And I'll always take 15 minutes to chat with somebody because you just never know where it's going to go. Like Megan, you and I met last year, and I was so pleased to learn about this podcast and about what you were doing. Like, we're on the same wavelength, and we're not in the same country, but it's still amazing. And I think that's how Ebony and I met with Vet Stay Go Diversify. We just saw that we were doing the same thing. So we met on Skype because Zoom wasn't a thing then in 2017. And I remember where I was, and I remember it was just a lovely chat. There was no agenda. There was nowhere, it didn't really go anywhere as far as like an immediate thing, but it was a wonderful relationship, and none of the other amazing things would have ever happened if we hadn't just had an initial chat. So I think when you're networking, the things that I would maybe recommend is that you don't have to have an agenda, but it's just, you might be curious to meet them and hear their story and hear what they're all about, and tell them a little bit about yourself and see the other part is lending value to the other person. So thinking about, can you make a connection for them? when you're listening to their story, would it be helpful if oh, geez, I know this person, you should really meet this person, or geez, have you heard about this book? Because it's a really, that makes me think about this. So lending value to the person that you're networking with is never a bad thing. And I'm always shocked and amazed at where some of these things go. You just never know when somebody's going to say, oh, Megan would be a great person for this role. You need to talk to Megan. Those are things that come up all the time.
Yep. It's actually come up for me even recently. Somebody thought of me for something. So yeah. And I definitely think it's better to do it when you don't have an agenda. It's like you can be perfectly happy and in your world is just hunky dory. But I think it's good to build connections and relationships because you never know, like a opportunity popping up that you probably never would have thought of before, but someone knew you just enough that they thought of you when they knew of the opportunity. I think that's super important. I also think it is just good to have these supportive networks because there will also, I think, be times when things aren't hunky-dory and you are, whether you're just ready for a change or something else. And I know the feeling of feeling alone and that you're not quite sure who to call. Sometimes it's just, you got to sit and think, oh, wait, I do know people. Or just, it happens that your paths cross at the time when you really needed it. Yeah. And speaking of things coming up, where did it kind of come up for you where you had a special passion with helping others with their career journey?
Yeah. So when I left clinical practice, I kept getting phone calls from colleagues who were, I think no one could have been more surprised than maybe even me that I left equine practice because I was a pretty diehard equine person. And I was like, performance vet, I had a pretty clear career path, right? And so I kept getting calls from colleagues being like, well, you left practice. Like, do you like it? Is everything okay? Like, and then they would also start to say, well, I don't think that I have anything else to offer. Like, I doubt that anything else would come up for me. Like, I feel like I don't even know who I would be if I wasn't a clinical vet. And I thought, I don't know. And at the same time, kind of simultaneously, I was after leaving clinical practice, meeting all these amazing veterinarians who'd done cool things. Like I kind of knew about, you could be a government vet, and I knew that you could work in meat inspection, and I knew that you could be a surgeon or be a specialist. And those were kind of the paths that I knew about. But then when I joined this surveillance network, I was like, oh, there's like 8 million different ways to be a cool veterinarian. There's so many ways. And the impact that they're making is so much different. And it's so much neater. Like if you make a policy that impacts like animal welfare, that's impacting millions of animals. Like how cool is that? That's never something that I would have thought of. Or like pig veterinarians are so into data. Like or poultry veterinarians are really into pathology. Like there's just all these roles that I think I never even considered because I was so bent on being an equine vet. And so I guess I thought there's just a gap here, right? And I love to write. And I guess I was at this time where I had I had a young child. So I was trying to figure out like what hobbies could I do that are also not going to take me away from her too much and are going to be something fun. So I thought, well, maybe I can write. And I was pretty nervous to do it actually, to tell their stories or to think like, who am I to do that? Who am I to tell anybody's story, or who am I to like write anything up, or, you know what I mean? Like I'm just one person. So I remember telling my wild and crazy idea to a couple of people, and they were like, oh yeah, they didn't think it was a terrible idea. So it was nice to have some early encouragement. And so that's where it started. And then it kind of grew from there. And in my MBA, I did a project on career paths. People started asking me to do resumes. So I thought, okay, great. I can probably do that. So I did it I got a certification and did it as a fee for service. So kind of moved on here, I guess. Yeah.
So now I'm really fascinated with an MBA when you were focusing on career paths. What did you learn? Because I'm sure you had to research so much for that. So what did you learn about career paths that kind of was interesting to you?
Yeah. So when I went into my MBA, this program had an opportunity to do a major research project. So I did a survey, veterinary professionals who were around the world. So veterinarians specifically, any veterinarian could participate, clinical or non-clinical. So I had over 1,000 responses from all over the world. A good portion of them were from North America, and about half were clinical and about half were non-clinical veterinarians. So they'd either left the profession or they had diversified their roles. So we asked them all sorts of things, like we applied a calling scale. I guess it measures how dedicated or how much you feel called by a higher power to be part of the profession, which a lot of people in caring professions feel. We asked them about when they made their career shifts, how they made them, what helped them, what helped them stay in practice, what helped them to leave. And so really interesting stuff. And I also had to do a big literature review, as you do for any kind of research project. So that was kind of neat to comb through all of that research and see. One of the things that I think you and I chatted about before was around professional identity and how we make those professional identities. I love some of the work that's been done in the UK, particularly around professional identity, because it turns out that actually, the reasons and hangups that we have about leaving practice or changing what we do is a lot of it is formed by, what we believe is a real vet, or what we believe is a real, how we form our professional identity about who we are and how we make sense of who we are in the world.
That's huge. I mean, this is exactly what you and I are trying to shift, is that mindset around what is the definition of veterinarian or veterinary technician. And we're trying to expand it so that people can have this more open, free realm of, professional identities.
Yeah, I guess if you're struggling to think about what you could do with your role, or that, oh, I couldn't possibly do X, Y, or Z, or that's not what a real vet does, or if you're feeling critical of somebody else or maybe curious or interested about what somebody else has done, I think it's important to think about where your professional identity, and maybe even if you're not questioning it, it's important to think about where your professional identity comes from. Who helped to shape that? It was probably stuff from an early archetype that you might have formed from a book about, like, what's a veterinarian? Maybe you saw a veterinarian when you took your pet in. Maybe in veterinary college, you probably had an idea of what a real vet is. That real vets work hard. And this is also some of the beliefs that we hold around boundaries and how we negotiate them. And why sometimes it's hard for us to not burn out, because we might have these beliefs that as we built our professional identity, that might go against building boundaries or doing something differently. So if you had this belief that was instilled in you from vet school or from your early career that veterinarians work until the job is done, veterinarians always help animals no matter what, or veterinarians put themselves last, or whatever those things might be, or real vets are in clinical practice, real vets do this, then those are important to question, because they might have been formed by the people around you, but they might not have had all the data. And now that you're older, you might have different data. You might find that you want to make different conclusions. And some of those beliefs that formed your professional identity, maybe they don't serve you anymore. And maybe they're not true anymore. Like 30 years ago, there was a belief that women couldn't be veterinarians, right? Or 30 or 40 years ago, or like real vets are not women, or large animal vets are not women. Like those are things that were real a long time ago, but they're not true now. Real vets have to work 5 or 6 days a week. That's not always true. There's so many things that we have to examine with our professional identity. So if you're finding that you're stuck somewhere, I think that is a way to think about it, is like, what is, who told me that? Is it actually true?
Yeah, I've spoken with a couple of women veterinarians who were going through vet school during those days, and their story is fascinating. So within a couple of decades, we are now 80% female of profession. So it's crazy how things can change. So that professional identity changed real fast. And I think a lot of people, again, probably from that similar generation, James Herriot, that is the professional identity that people have on veterinarians. And oh my goodness, just going through vet school or even before, back to what I was talking about, is people saw this as a very hard to get into. And so they already were starting to contribute to this mindset of, you have to be a hard worker. You have to be extremely dedicated. You're not going to get paid anything. So you're going to be poor, and you're just going to do things out of the goodness of your heart. And you're going to just love animals and save the world. You have all those kinds of things that are in your mind. And I hate that it potentially can limit people on, what they feel is their definition or their identity. And yes, being able to question those along the way. I'm married to someone who is not a veterinary professional. So a lot of things, it's wonderful to have someone sometimes to kind of bring in that perspective. And we went to a dinner last night with a kennel club, a local kennel club. And I shared that I was a veterinarian. I know that that was dangerous. Everybody, you don't have to let me know. I said I was a veterinarian. And immediately the question is, where do you practice?
Yeah.
And it was over and over and over again. And in the car, as we were leaving, my husband's like, wow, people really have a very narrow view of what a veterinarian is. And I said, yes, exactly. So even that over and over and over again, it can really start to concrete this idea of, oh, a vet is a clinical veterinarian. You have a physical location where you practice and they can come to you. Like that is their definition, but that does not have to be your definition.
Yeah. And these things change over time, right? And it's so interesting to see. Yeah, it's interesting to see that. And I think often it's because we just don't know those things, or we just don't know what the boxes could be, right? And but that's the thing about people, is that we don't really fit into like neat little boxes. Our brains would like to shortcut that because it's easier for habits. And like, we're just going to do that as, like, oh, okay, this is a dog. That like my brain looks at a dog is like, this is a dog. But like, do you know what I mean? Like people are not always as easy to put into little, like, this is a horse vet. This is a nutrition vet. Like this doesn't always work.
Yeah. Well, especially people who aren't even in the industry. So just imagine, it's
Yeah.
like I have this much knowledge. And so, yeah, that's my little box that I'm going to put you in when I hear that word. I think part of it is getting exposure. So, I mean, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to veterinary students is about staying curious and just try stuff. It's just like be open, talk to people, try stuff, even if at first it doesn't sound that interesting, but you never know. That's when you start to, as you said, grow older, get more experiences, and start to know, oh, wow, this is just expanding. And I think what's really exciting is in the future, it's just going to continue to expand with the way our world works. So there will be jobs next year that do not exist today. And to me, that is so exciting.
A good reminder. Yeah. Who knew like 20 years ago, like when that there would be telehealth or like virtual care? Like I mean, the Veterinary Act in Ontario, Canada is being reopened right now. And it was created before the internet, like it was created at maybe the dawn of the internet. So they couldn't have imagined some of the things that have happened, and that'll happen again. Like just you couldn't have imagined all the things that are going to happen, right? I could never have imagined that it would have probably been quite almost impossible for me to work virtually with a team in the UK before the pandemic even.
Back to you talked about like this gut feeling when you're like trying to know if maybe a new role is a good transition for you, but it may not always be that easy. And again, I can speak from experience of trying to understand if something is a right fit. So because of what you do, you talk about careers and you share careers, and you probably do a lot of career counseling in some way. How do you help people understand if something is a good fit for them?
The big things that I counsel people to do is to remember their values and their purpose and some of the parameters they have. Like, I need to be in Southern Idaho because I need to be close to my family, or I want to build a life that I can be home after school with my kids. I can go play lacrosse every day. I don't know, whatever that is, right? Or like I can care for my aging dog, or whatever you might find. Or like, I know that this is kind of what I want to build. So there's like hard parameters. And then there's really your values. Like, does it align with your values and what you want to achieve? And then the other parts that I think are important are that collecting data and saying like, okay, asking mentors, like, does this sound like an opportunity that kind of fits? Also understanding that some people don't always have the imagination for that. So be careful who you ask. You're ultimately going to be the litmus test of whether it's right or not. And that gut feeling, maybe if you haven't had a lot of practice at it, then it may not be that easy to hear. But I think the other part is that it isn't that big the deal if you make a mistake in your career. If you decide, well, I'm going to try this role for 18 months, like, okay, and it doesn't work out. Okay. If you have to leave after 6 months, well, who cares? Like, it's not like somebody is going to come and like cut up your stethoscope in your white coat as you leave the door. Like, they're not coming to like cut up your card that says you can't practice anymore, or like says like, oh, well, you're alert. Now you're a companion animal vet. You can never go back to like working on horses ever again. Like, there's nobody policing that, aside from regulators. But as long as you're paying your license fees and not getting into trouble, you're probably fine. So there isn't, and I don't think there's as much stigma anymore of leaving a workplace if it isn't a good fit. Like, if it isn't, we've seen that acceleration of people leaving their jobs in more quick succession, which maybe is good or bad. It does mean that no one's going to judge you too harshly. So I think if you're curious about it and you feel like it might be a good fit, there's nothing wrong with trying it. Just relax a little bit about it, because it isn't like getting into vet school or not getting into vet school. Like, it's not as binary as that. So I guess that would be my advice, is like, gather data, get still and listen to yourself and see if it aligns with who you think you are and who you want to be and the parameters that you have, but also recognize that it's not the end of the world if it doesn't work out.
And we've talked a lot about trying to figure out what you like.
Mm-hmm.
It's also good data to find out what you don't like. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I've had a couple of people recently mention, sometimes it's you test out a few things and you lean more into what you figure out you do like, and then you just lean away from the stuff that you don't like. It's a little bit of a,
like, well, cured that curiosity. I know I'm never going to want to do that again. Like, that's great. That's good to know, right? I never want to do XYZ again. I never want to be on call in this situation. I never want to work for that kind of thing.
Yep.
Cool. That's great. Now you know more. Or like, that just wasn't for me. I thought it was, but it wasn't. And that's okay. You'll learn something.
Our time has flown by. I just looked up and I was like, oh, as we start to wrap up, is there's something on your mind right now with veterinary medicine that you want to make sure that we talk about?
Ooh, that's, again, another good question. I think what I love about vet med right now is that there's so much opportunity and so much, like, we're really in a time, I hope, in a time of change where we can accelerate the change in our profession to be modernized and change and maybe it'll look completely different in a few years. Like, it's accelerated so much in the past since the pandemic started, opened up so many opportunities for virtual work, for telehealth, for different collaborations. I'm just excited to see where it goes and to be part of that. What a time to be alive in our profession.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And if people wanted to go and learn a little bit more about vets, stay, go, diversify, and talking more about career paths and all the stuff that you do there, where would you want them to go?
Yeah, you're welcome to look at our website, which is vsgd.co. Welcome to find me on LinkedIn. I'm often there, and on Instagram. And then we have Facebook communities as well that have about 30,000 veterinary professionals worldwide. So you're welcome to join any of those or get on our mailing list. So we'd love to see some of you there, and love to have you join the conversation and join a supportive community where we kind of talk about different things in veterinary medicine.
All right. Well, I always like to wrap up with a final few questions. So the first one is there anything that people may get wrong about you?
Yeah, people, I think, often don't know which box to put me in. So they're always like, so wait a minute, do you like practice? Do you not practice? So I think we've probably covered that off, but I always think that's probably the most common misconception.
I can relate. The second question is, do you have an interest or a skill that maybe not a lot of people know about?
I beekeep with my husband. So we have 10 beehives. Yes.
Now, is your husband a veterinarian or?
No, he's an engineer. So
Okay.
kind of the exact opposite.
Yeah. Well, IT professional. So yep, I get
it. Same wavelength.
Yep. Yep. Do you have anything on your bucket list that you would like to do?
I would like to go back to Norway. I visited there when I got married, and I would really like to go back there someday.
It is beautiful. I went when it was very cold, so I might go back when it's not that cold.
We went in the summer the first time, and I would highly recommend that. It was beautiful.
Nice. And finally, what is something you are very grateful for?
I think connections and community, and just the people that are involved in all of my life and all the areas of my life. I feel like I'm so blessed to have I don't really use that word blessed, but like that's something that everybody says. But I do feel very grateful for all of the people and the relationships that I have in my life.
I think it's because I have a sign. So it's like this blessed word is. Thank you for joining us on Vet Life Reimagined. Please make sure that you click the follow button on your podcast app to avoid missing one of our weekly episodes. I have a lot of wonderful episodes coming. If you would like to support this podcast, there are a few other ways that are 100% free. Give it a 5-star rating and review, and then subscribe over on the Vet Life Reimagined YouTube channel. We appreciate you and all of your support. Until next time.